Good morrow to you all. You have fallen on barred times.
Brought to you by RHUL Shakespeare Society.
You've joined me, Cassie Dixon.
And me, Jack Hardman, as we bear some bardy truths. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Barred Times. This week we're going to be talking to Will Lawson. Say hi, Will.
Hello.
And we're just going to be talking about some of his recent endeavours, his involvement in the show The Massacre of Paris, and his recent dramaturging experience with Iphigenia in Taurus with dramaturg. So, Will, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm very flattered to be here. I'm having a good time.
That's good. You should be.
Okay, well then.
I'm kidding. Yeah, no. So obviously you have been a part of the recent show that Shakespeare has been doing, The Massacre of Paris, and I would just like to ask you, basically, how's it going? How's everything going with that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the first Marlowe that I've ever done, which is quite an interesting experience. It's sort of it's interesting seeing sort of very similar language to Shakespeare, and yet very clear differences in sort of style, which I find quite interesting. And Massacre is also, as a sort of former history student, really interesting because obviously it's set during one of the most sort of harrowing periods of religious strife in world history. So being able to be part of a dramatization of that is endlessly fascinating. Yeah, so I'm having a whale of a time.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a really interesting point about Marlowe being kind of, it reminds you of Shakespeare, but also there's that slight difference that it's slightly, how could you put your finger on that difference there? Because I've not read Massacre before, so I'm really looking forward to this coming out so that I can experience it. But if you would try and nail down the difference between, say, Marlowe's style and Shakespeare's style, what would you say?
I would say I won't speak as any kind of expert. This is just based on my experience reading the two. But I would say Shakespeare tends to be more, and this is an oversimplification and a half, but I feel like Shakespeare tends towards more character-focused pieces. So, for example, when he talks about the ancient sort of Roman systems, he'll always focus it on a character like Coriolanus or Julius Caesar, people like that. Yeah. And I find Marlowe tends to like writing about sort of concepts and corruptions. So I think Jew of Malta, while also being, and Dr. Faustus are very, very sort of interesting character pieces. I feel like he's more interested in talking about the political and sort of moralistic tendencies behind them. So, for example, Dr. Faustus is very much centered around a guy's relationship between himself and the church, and a lot of the sort of innate sins and corruptions there. And Massacre, in particular, is very much about the political ramifications of the massacre itself. I was surprised reading it how early it comes in.
How early the actual violence actually begins?
The actual massacre itself is one of the first things that happens in the play. So really? So much of it is it blew me away because I thought it would be more lead up and then payoff. He does kind of a similar thing he does with Faustus, where the defining incident for me, for example, Faustus has already made the decision to start cavorting with black magic and demons from the beginning of the play. And the massacre is also very much centered around the fallout of the massacre after it happens. So he's much more focused on aftermath, I find.
Fair. Okay. Yeah. That's an incredibly insightful response. I was expecting something more guttural, Shakespeare uses weirder adverbs or something like that.
I mean, he does. Don't get me wrong, but
oh yeah.
This is just my experience of the man. I'm sort of this is my experience of them.
Yeah. No. I'm. This is not me complaining. This is me being incredibly impressed. Also feeling that I'm now extremely out of my league.
I am desperately riffing here.
Good.
It's just a weird imposter syndrome that comes with Shakespeare so often. It's like, I need to know everything. It's like, no, it's fine. You know what you know. Make the most of that. It's okay.
just riff.
Yeah.
So, in terms of Massacre of Paris itself, what actually drew you to auditioning for the project? Was there anything in particular? Was it the piece? Was it the opportunity to do some voice work?
A large part of it was the opportunity to do voice work. So, for people who don't know, I graduated Royal Holloway last year as part of the history department, and I'm an honorary member of the society. So I noticed on one of the old chats that they mentioned, hey, honorary members can do this, and I thought, I like voice acting, I've never done a Marlowe before, and the play itself looks really interesting because of all that juicy historical context that I find really interesting and I really wanted to tackle. So I submitted an audition for it, and in a very flattering way they gave me a part, which was very, very nice of them.
Yeah. No, well, I'm extremely excited to see what you make of that coming forwards. How's the as an actor, how much voice work have you actually done before this? Obviously, you run a podcast.
Yes.
Which, if you'd like to shout out, you're absolutely welcome to.
It is called Oratory Creations, or the Oratory Podcast. It's just part of a little production house that I have going on, which is producing a lot of small audio dramas based partly on certain fantasy universes that I'm fond of, some science fiction, and just basically any story ideas that I kind of want to explore. So that, in terms of your original question, is a lot of what my voice work has been self-made projects. I was also involved in my first year with a radio drama called Of Sapiens and Stars on Insanity Radio. Which was a lot of fun. First time I ever tried out a Russian accent was on that show.
Oh, that's brave.
It was a lot of fun. It did, genuinely, just because no one had auditioned for the Russian. They asked me to give it a go. I was like, I've never done a Russian accent before, but we'll see how it goes. I have no idea.
Very good.
So it seemed to go all right. And before that, I was involved in one or two YouTube animated series, which I don't know if they're available now, and a video game called Sword Legacy Omen, in which I spoke a lot of gibberish, and I am the only person who will ever truly know the lines I did for that game. Fair play.
You're quite well rounded in terms of what you've actually done in voice work before. Is this the first like play you've done? I mean, obviously the radio play with Insanity, but other than that,
to an extent, I think this is probably it's definitely the first Shakespeare I've ever done as purely a voice actor, and yes, I suppose it is one of the first sort of big projects where I've been given a character and been asked to interpret.
Yeah, so. and what a character! How you find what's your how are you finding the character of obviously the Duke of Guise?
Duke of Guise. So, spoiler alert for people who haven't seen or read the play. The Duke of Guise is basically the guy who is behind the massacre. So we can tell right from the off that he is a deeply romantic character with a large and lovable fan base. No, he's not. He's a monster. But the thing that I found sort of interesting about characters like that is trying to tap into why they have the extreme views that they do. So the Duke of Guise, I think it's very easy when it comes to a lot of Shakespearean villains to go, he's the shouty, angry man who will yell lectures towards everyone and beg for their attention. Yeah.
In a kind of Scar from the Lion King-esque way.
A little bit, yeah. It's like the sheer number of shouty Oberons you get is kind of...
True. That's true.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, Guise does have a tendency towards that. So, it's definitely not a break from that. But I kind of wanted to take a look at the character and see, what would motivate someone to have such a hatred of the Huguenot population. So... he talks a lot about his duty and his needs and his commitment to the church, but there's also sort of little traces of inadequacy, that he feels like he constantly needs to be doing more, that he's not worthy of the tasks he's been set, and he has sort of people that he wants to earn the respect of, like the Queen Mother, that he's very, very sort of cheerful and amicable towards. And I think as well, in terms of the motivation of a character that is actually engaged in that kind of brutality, is sort of getting an understanding of contrast for me. So just to, so it's very easy, for example, to play that kind of character. It's like constantly angry, constantly hateful, constantly aggressive. I sort of took it a different way and sort of looked at it and goes, he's in the midst of this massacre, and this is the happiest he's ever been in his life. He's fulfilling his purpose. He's out there doing what he has been put on Earth to do. How does someone face that kind of situation? And I'm not going to say that I like the guy by any stretch of the imagination, because I would be a monster for saying that. But I kind of wanted to find a sort of interesting spin on things, and hopefully people will find that.
Yeah. I mean, we've already seen a sneak peek as part of Anat a few weeks ago. A Night of the Theatre. That is up on YouTube somewhere. I'm not entirely sure where. I should probably look that up. But yeah, that is up on YouTube somewhere for you to check out, you listeners, where you can get a sneak peek of Will doing one of the monologues from Massacre. And what a performance, may I just say. What a performance. I've never known someone who could sound so much like a dragon in my life.
I'll happily take that. Take that, Cumberbatch.
Yeah. It is an incredible performance. Obviously, as well as this part that you've been playing recently, you have just finished dramaturging for the show Iphigenia.
Yes.
So that has just finished.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, how did you find that process? What was there anything in particular as part of that stood out to you?
Well, I mean, the thing that attracted me most to the project was obviously the prospect of working with James Shannon, because he is a beautiful, talented man, and we all adore him.
That's true.
Yes, no doubt. But I think with Iphigenia, it was really interesting as well. It's just because that show had a very long production process. It started out as it was going to be on stage with a completely different society, and it ended up being an audio drama with drama sock that got put on almost a year later. Because I still remember meeting up with James about a year ago, just over the Christmas holidays, just sort of drafting ideas of how we would want to tackle the project, and sort of interpreting Greek drama and trying to find a way to get that kind of ancient style of writing and characterization to connect with a modern audience, while also being, helpfully, just a little bit less misogynistic. If we can achieve that.
Yeah. We were saying, I think we were discussing this last week with James briefly, but we, there was quite a lot of things which you guys actually changed about it, wasn't there? Because there was the whole scene between Orestes and Iphigenia, where there was all that dialogue and all that. That isn't actually in the original, is it?
That lengthy sequence where they're discussing things, I believe it was a feature of both of the translations that I saw. It was heavily cut down. From what I remember from the script and the draft. I think there were a lot of elements that we changed, and I think a lot of the sort of the emphasis of it we kind of wanted to shift in terms of there was a lot of dialogue that we felt was superfluous. Of Pylades saying it's like, this is the responsibility of this is a man's responsibility. And I thought it was like, Iphigenia is the quest heroine here. Don't try and hoard in on her limelight because she is the one getting everything done. You're wasting time and no one's going to like you. Also, sexist. No. Eject.
Yes, that doesn't help.
Yeah.
Orestes is definitely the kind of... He's the Baby Yoda of of the story in that he just is people just carrying him around.
Oh,
people just carrying him around.
I feel like Baby Yoda pulls his own weight in that show. Without wanting to spoil too much for people who have seen The Mandalorian, I feel like he definitely contributed heavily at a couple of different points. But yeah, it was really interesting though, sort of tackling that kind of project, because I'm sure sort of James mentioned a lot of the other changes we made, like serendipitously, this was just through casting, all of the native Taurians ended up being women. So we ended up having this wonderful sort of Amazonian context to it, which I felt which we felt was really interesting, because they're so often portrayed as this sort of like savage barbarian culture. And it's really easy, I think, to find very sort of colonial takes on that. Barbarism and savagery, which neither of us were keen on. Neither of us, and we were always struggling with the process of how do we present that culture as different and antagonistic without being actively offensive. And I think just based on the performance of the actors we got, and so many fantastic ones in there, there was a lot of sort of like dignity, but also sort of strength and power, I think, to that culture that came across, which for me was probably one of my favourite aspects of the show.
Fair. Yeah, that makes sense. And out of interest, how many have you ever dramaturged before this, or is this your kind of first go at it?
I think I think that might actually have been the first one that I did, because I've discussed projects with a lot of people, but I've never officially been a dramaturg on one.
Fair. Yeah. So in that case, how did you find that compared to, say, because obviously you have previously, before this, you've directed stuff for Unseen, I believe it was, and you have acted in many things throughout your time at the university. Particularly, we've been very lucky to have you in quite a few Shakespeare plays. So how does that role compare to directing and acting, and how did you find it compared to those roles?
Well, I think it's really interesting for me, because one of my big passions is story development, writing, and coming up with character concepts. So having the opportunity to work with James, who had a very clear vision for the show, and find ways to tap into as much raw character emotion and try and get a real good understanding of where the show is going is really interesting. But I think that's one of the most interesting things, because I suppose the last major project I worked on before Iphigenia was I directed the Macbeth audio drama.
Yes,
and that was quite interesting, because sort of developing both of those centered heavily on developing where we wanted the characters to go and what we felt the core of the story was. And I think that's sort of the nature of any good adaptation, is getting a really sort of solid understanding of where you want, what kind of story you want to tell, and how your characters are going to best express it. And to be fair, we've had a couple of good shows like that, like a certain Love Labour's Lost take, that I felt I felt did that very, very well.
I'll stop at you.
Never. But that was I think that was the core of it. Was the difference for me was, instead of having something that I was writing from scratch, it was nice to have that sort of collaborative process. So some of my more extreme ideas were sort of challenged by the more experienced classicist. I feel like I might as well tell the story. Spoilers ahead for Iphigenia. If you haven't watched it, do, because it's incredible and it's one of my favourite projects that I've worked on. But at the end of the play, Athena shows up in this sort of big storm, and sort of dictates instructions to Thoas, or Thoas as we did it in the show, of what to do next and how to honour the goddess Artemis. And throughout the play, the Taurians had been a cult of Artemis. They had been constantly referencing the goddess. The goddess was involved in rescuing Iphigenia. And about halfway through dramaturging, I just sent a message to James and said, I have a controversial take now. I want to change the god that shows up at the end of the play. Because I felt it made much more sense for it to be Artemis rather than Athena.
Artemis, yeah.
Because she was the one who had been referenced out the whole thing. Now, there's a long-standing tradition of having Athena show up in the sort of more active interventionist role, and they were heading towards Athens, so it made sense for her to show up, and there were like lots of very compelling historical reasons and cultural reasons for her to stick around, but for me, I was kind of trying to approach that less as...
in
a narrative fashion.
Yeah, that does make sense. But then also, I do have to... I tend to agree with James, the director here, on this. Simply because... well, you know what? Actually, I say this, but it depends on whose story you look at it from. Because if you look at it from Iphigenia's point of view, it makes a lot more sense for Athene to be the person to break, no, not Athene, for Artemis to be the person who kind of steps in and stops everything. But then if you look at it from Orestes' point of view, who's all of his journeys through the Oresteia have all basically based around Athena helping him out. Athene and the sun god. What's he called? Apollo. Helping him out. I think that makes more sense, and I obviously traditionally, despite the fact this is absolutely Iphigenia's story, there's no doubt about that. Traditionally, it would be centered more on the kind of male focus, unfortunately. Because it's such an incredible story from Iphigenia's point of view.
Yeah, well, also, I think for me as well, it was also the expectation that we were doing this as a sort of a single take show. We didn't have the context of the others ahead of us. So for me, it was about, will the audience that we are presenting to follow that in as much? But I think now that it's a permanent audio drama that you can still listen to, by now.
So where would you find that, actually, quickly?
I believe you would find that on the Royal Holloway Drama Society YouTube channel. So check that out, please. Good. Please. Please. It was great. Can I sound more pathetic? No, I think it's a genuinely good show and you should go watch it. But also,
I would agree, but we are biased.
It would make me happy. We are all biased.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So
anyway, those are just
obviously
my feelings.
No. I quite like that as a take. It is definitely something that crossed my mind during the process of rehearsals for that play. And in general, because obviously you've been a part of quite a few plays on campus up to this point, which one from the shows you have done, either on campus or outside, would you think is particularly kind of influential or your favourite that you've been a part of?
Oh god, that's a tough one. It really depends on which kind of thing. I think from a pure acting standpoint, it depends. From a pure acting standpoint, I think Coriolanus was probably my best work, and one of, I think, the more definitely one of the more interesting plays, because that sort of pushed me in a lot of different directions. It was one of my first lead characters. I was playing a minor bit character called Coriolanus in it, and there was a lot of action, there was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of emotional nuance to the character, and it was so much fun to get stuck into that. So that was an absolute delight from start to finish. And I think comedy as well. Unfortunately, we didn't get to do the full run, but the shows we managed to do of Happily Ever After for the Holloway Players.
Yeah.
It's a lovely group.
An incredible show. Big shout out to the Holloway Players, as we did it last week, but we're doing it again because they're wonderful people doing wonderful work.
My only regret from uni at all is that I didn't do more stuff with them, because they are the best.
Yeah.
And then so I feel like I could go on about this question for hours, but I will stick with two more just because I think they're just because I feel the need. No, go for it. So, again, for me, I think one of the most emotional experiences I had was I didn't think I was going to direct a show at Holloway beyond the one unseen piece I did. So when the opportunity came around for me to do Macbeth, which is like audio drama, voice acting formats like this I know, and I have a concept I want to put ahead for Macbeth, that was a wonderful project because it was so creatively free. I had such a wonderful group of people working with me throughout the entire process. I feel like everyone threw themselves into it 100%. And it's some of the best work that I think that I've certainly done, and it's some of the best performances that I've seen. There are sequences towards the end of that show, despite the fact that I spent hours upon hours and days upon days editing them, that still give me the chills, and I chalk that entirely up to the wonderful team I had behind me. That was incredible. And the last thing I swear to God I will mention on this is the project I'm working on right now. It's a production of Romeo and Juliet with Ruckus Theatre Company. It's the first big stage professional show that I have ever done in my life, and I could not love everyone involved with that project more. They have been wonderful and professional from start to finish. It's some of the most in-depth character work I've ever done. It's been meticulously thought out, and it's such a hold nothing back take on Romeo and Juliet. It pushed me so far, and that is going to be a really special show when that comes out.
That's really exciting. Yeah. Where can people kind of see you in that then? So
if you head over to the website of the Cockpit Theatre, you can find that we are publicised on there. I believe, COVID permitting, we will be performing that on stage in the early weeks of December. I believe it's from the 13th or 14th onwards. But double check the website to be absolutely certain of that, because that is... and I say this as someone who is very admittedly biased, but that is not one you want to miss, because everyone in it has been incredible from start to finish. That's very good. I'm glad that is going so well. Obviously, we had James on last week, who is helping, I believe, stage manage that show. He is, yes. Yeah, and he was singing that show's praises as well. I'm very excited to go see it. Wonderful. Obviously, out of those, those are examples of you directing and acting. Is there anyone in your kind of past as an actor or a director who has particularly influenced you? Out of that, because obviously you must have had some kind of influence to be able to get to the point where you are now. I have a lot of different influences. I think in terms of I'll go for actors, I think, just because I could sing the praises of so many different people at the uni. We will be here all day. So I'll go for actors, but yeah. So one of my absolute favorites of all time is probably not a well-known actor, but he's a man by the name of David Warner. Any nerds in the audience who have ever played the Baldur's Gate series might recognize him as John Arekas from those games. He was also he's had like a minor bit part in Titanic, and he's been in a lot of different Star Trek episodes. I think he's the one who has the distinction of being the man who tortured Patrick Stewart in a wonderful episode that is still very hard to watch. But he's a man of incredible presence. Something I absolutely love about him, his vocal delivery, the sheer amount of emotion he manages to pour into it is something I absolutely love. So he's definitely an influence of mine. There are a lot of voice actors like that. I think Keith David, Kevin Michael Richardson, who have two of the most beautiful voices on earth. You have as well, I think Alex Wilton Regan as well. Been a big influence. I'm also just basically anyone who's ever played the Doctor. Just all of them. They're all wonderful. I love them so much. To be fair, I could gush about that all day. I am worried. I'm honestly worried that this show will just become me gushing with different people about Doctor Who at some point. As that's exactly what happened last week, and I'm trying to avoid it again this week. Okay, I will restrain myself then. But yeah, those are some really interesting choices. I must admit, I have not heard of all of them, but I'd be surprised if you had. Yeah. But no, those are some really interesting choices. Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's us done with talking about you. So Good.
If you're okay with that.
I'm always okay with that.
Okay, good. and let's move on to the news for this week. So the big news thing from this week is that The Crown has the new series of The Crown has come out, and it has recently come under fire for basically making up scenes. And people are not very happy because obviously the show is kind of branded itself as almost a biopic of the royal family. I just wanted to talk about basically where you stand on biopics and things like that, making up scenes and making up history.
See, this is a difficult one because I have two different hats I wear for this. One of them is as the historian who is very much in favour of do the research, commit yourself to what you're trying to adapt, and try and make it as realistic and grounded as possible. But I think with that also comes the creative hat, which is, at the end of the day, this is about narrative. It's about character, and it's about exploring ideas and themes. And I think there is definitely room for both. One of the most interesting shows that I stumbled across recently is actually the Vikings show. I believe is available on Amazon Prime right now.
Yeah, Amazon Prime.
Because what Amazon Prime really needs right now is more people advertising it.
In
case you haven't heard, there's this little indie studio called Amazon. They're really struggling. But that show, unlike a certain Assassin's Creed game that came out recently, has a very grounded take on a lot of Norse history. I have feelings about that game, but it's really interesting because you can see from start to finish loads of different sort of environmental details. The costume design is almost like incredibly realistic. They have a lot of very real, very fleshed out characters, and it feels very true to life. And it's very hard to describe, but I think it's one of those things where you can tell they've looked very deeply at the key figures in Viking history. And so, for example, when they do the raid on, I believe it's Lindisfarne, which was the first sort of major Viking raid on an English settlement, almost anything else would hype that up to be this enormous raid, this big moment of great significance. The show does give it its proper significance, but it's very tame, it's very restrained, and it doesn't hold back from presenting the brutality of it while still managing to make the characters sympathetic. So I think true to life. Yeah.
And I think it also happens like mid-season, doesn't it? It happens in like episode 4 or something like that.
If I remember rightly, yeah.
It's
really early on.
So it's not... because I've seen the first season of Vikings. There
are so bloody many.
I don't know.
There are so many.
It's such a long series of television, but yeah, I couldn't agree more, honestly, about the whole just applying to narrative, because I think looking away from TV and at film, things like films like The Social Network, where obviously the whole context for that entire film is completely made up. The girlfriend at the beginning, completely made up. And certainly if you're looking at... and I want to preface this by going, I'm not a film student.
That's fine.
I don't know. But this is from what I have read and from what I have listened to about these things. But certainly about things like I think it's actually approached in the film Vice, about the biopic about Dick Cheney, where they actually approach a scene and basically go, yeah, like in the film, they go, yeah, none of this happened. This conversation did not happen. There is no way we could tell that this happened because no one will give us any information. But we figure a conversation might have happened like this at some point.
See, one of the things I find quite interesting about that as well is one of my favourite shows, I think of all time, came out very, very recently, is the HBO miniseries Chernobyl. That show is absolutely fascinating in terms of its depiction of that disaster, because so much of that is completely true. The response of the Soviet government, the actions of the scientists involved, the lengths they went to try and get that disaster under control. So much of that is very real and very true, and I've, having listened to the podcast surrounding it and read up on the event itself as part of my degree, so much of that is completely accurate, and they dived deep into the research, but they very clearly had a story that they wanted to tell, which is summarized in one of the first lines of the show, which is, what is the cost of lies? And it's interesting when a show has to sort of lie about that in order to get to it. So, for example, one of the characters in it, I want to say her name is Svetlana, I could be wrong about that. She's a female scientist, and she's the one who sort of like tags along with the group, and it brings them a lot of very important information and sort of guides them along the right path. She is not a real person. She was never actually connected to it. She's a creation from the show.
Really?
That is basically an amalgamation of various different scientists who were there. But obviously, because they couldn't account for all of those different scientists as characters, and because there was no way to acknowledge the contribution of every single individual one of them, they amalgamated them into one character. But they admitted it at the end. They admitted that that was what they had done, and that this was one of the only ways to do it. Now, that may be considered by a lot of people to be an overreach in terms of narrative convenience, but what that actually did was that was a lie that allowed them to sort of represent a larger degree of scientific opinions, and to represent conversations that actually took place, and to have a contrast with the two main characters, to have them sort of have a counterweight to explore their ideas. Sort of, Hegelian dialectics, thesis, antithesis, and then you find the sort of core answer at the end. So that in itself was really, really interesting. But as well, there were a lot of things that the Chernobyl show did depict which were considered to be less accurate. So, for example, they draw a lot on eyewitness testimony, and there's a book called Voices of Chernobyl, in which they talk to a lot of the survivors from it.
Yeah.
And there are various accounts that claim that there was a large group of people standing on a bridge in Chernobyl who watched the fire in the reactor from this bridge, and the sort of ash started falling, and they thought it was like, aha, it's snowing, or there's this strange light in the sky, and all of those people supposedly got radiation sickness and died, and the show makes that conceit. There is a lot of controversy about whether or not that actually happened, because a lot of people claimed that there was no one on that bridge. That never happened, but the show insists that it did, because the eyewitness testimony that it had did insist it did. So
so it's also kind of that's a really interesting story to tell, that kind of, you don't even need to be involved in a disaster, you can just be watching it and still just destroyed by it. And I think that, like, that as a, is that a theme? That's more of just a story, isn't it?
But it is key to the story.
yeah, exactly. But and so having that as a like using that as almost a device, that is the conversation, though, isn't it? Because you have to remember that, yes, narratively it makes a lot of sense, and if I was writing something, I would probably a biopic of some kind, or telling a story that did actually happen, I probably would do that in order to make it fit a narrative, kind of the most effective narrative that I could tell. However, these are people's lives, and that is also a question. Is like, is messing with this misrepresenting people's actual lives?
See, for me, what it comes down to is A, how upfront you are about how you have adapted the show that you have, and B, why you have chosen to put that scene in the first place. So, for example, I think with now, granted, I haven't seen the Crown and their depiction of Diana. It's not a kind of show that I'm particularly interested in, so I'm unlikely to. But in terms of historical dramas, if we take, say, what's a good example of this? I'm trying to think. Oh, okay, let's take Chernobyl, because we've been talking about that a lot. So they put in a big courtroom scene at the end where the guy discusses this is why the Chernobyl disaster happened. I'm not going to spoil it because I genuinely believe everyone should watch that series. It is phenomenal. But this is why that happened. And they spell it out. And everything he says in that scene is true, despite the fact that he never said it at that specific court hearing, and the way in which that is framed never happened. But it is a way for them to compile all that together. It is a way of them telling the story and getting at the truth in that particular way. When something like Braveheart decides to de-age a princess, or like move her lifespan closer to Mel Gibson's so that they can have a relationship, that's sensationalism, and that's just kind of laughable and ridiculous, and why would you go to the trouble of doing that? It's William Wallace, for God's sake. It's not like you're at a lack for sex scenes that you could potentially have there, I'm sure. But like you get that with a lot of different things. It depends on what you're trying to adapt.
I think that kind of wrapping that conversation up, that is some really good points, and this has been lovely having you on the show. Will, I do have to ask before we finish up today, what is your favourite Shakespeare play?
Oh, okay. I'm going to try to keep this short. I love every character in Julius Caesar. That's fascinating. There isn't a single scene of Macbeth I don't like, and I love the relationship between Hamlet and Claudius, but I am going to probably go for Macbeth. I'm going to go for Macbeth. I love it. From beginning to end, I love it.
Good. You'd hope. You did direct it. He says, looking at Love Labour's Lost.
Which is amazing.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, so would you like a chance to plug all of your the series of shows and projects that you're
Okay, here we go. First of all, Massacre in Paris is going to be on RHUL Shakespeare Society's, I believe, YouTube channel. There's going to be a screening at some point, but check that out because that's got a lovely team behind it as well. Very talented group of people. Definitely check it out. Iphigenia and Iron Towers, it's come out, but if you haven't seen it already, go watch it. It's great. It's free. Just do it. Just do it and have fun. There's also, I'm gonna plug my own thing, even though it's mine, so it's awful. Oratory Creations. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on an Instagram page that I barely know how to update. I'm bad at social media, but check us out if you want to see nerdy ass people talk about nerdy ass things, and also do occasional audio dramas. Ruckus Theatre Company is doing a production of Romeo and Juliet at the Cockpit Theatre this December. Definitely check that out because there are so many wonderful people involved with that. And also there's a piece of mine that's being adapted for City Lighthouse Theatre's Scratch Night, but also check them out.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so check all of those things out, please.
You're quite busy, aren't you, Will? Yeah, just a little bit. No, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been incredibly lovely. It's been amazing talking to you about historical inaccuracies. I think it's added by the fact that you obviously have a degree in history, meaning that any conversation I feel instantly out of my depth, which is great. It's good. I like to feel half the point of this podcast is to make me realise quite how uneducated I am in everything.
Don't sell yourself short, Jack. So you're wonderful to talk to. You're a smart guy. Don't sell yourself short. No, viewership. Don't let him get away with this.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me this week, all of you, for Bard Times. This has been Jack Hardman. Stay safe, and in the words of the Bard himself, our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt.